Cynthia Harris, what one thing do you wish you'd have known 10 years ago?
One thing I wish I would have known 10 years ago, probably the fact that the world goes on. I think sometimes we can be catastrophic when we focus on things around us and think that something is going to be that same thing 10 years later. But the world actually does move on and we grow through what we actually go through. So that's one thing I wish I would have known 10 years ago.
There is something about the human psyche that is quite strange, isn't it? Because the only, change is the only constant. But everything changes for us as a species and always has done and will continue to do. Yet we are absolutely hopeless at managing things changing, aren't we? As people, things change and it scares us all the time. We're always clinging to maybe the past. Why do we do that?
That's a great question. I think humans, to your point, Andy, we are wired for comfort in so many regards. I think our natural sense is to go towards what's comfortable. Think about when you don't want to get out of the bed in the morning. It's more comfortable to stay in the bed until 9 a.m., right? But the truth is, growth requires discomfort. And it's something that I remind myself quite constantly that if I want to grow, if I want to be the version of myself that I envision, I have to embrace the fact that things are going to change and that change might be uncomfortable. So yeah, I think it's just our natural biological wiring to want to be comfortable. But the truth is, all the beautiful things in my life, many of them, I'd say, came as a result of pushing through discomfort.
One of the best things I ever heard, and I heard it just at the right time, I was about 22, 23 in one of my first jobs, and we were at some sort of training day, and there's a guy on stage, I don't know what his name was, I don't know what he was talking about, but one thing stuck with me 20 odd years later. He said, if you don't want change to happen, today is the best anything is ever going to be. And he said, are there things you don't like in life today? Like, yes. I said, well, then things have to change for them to improve. So you like change, don't you? No, I don't like change. Like, but you do. But the concept of change seems to freak us out. But if you ask us if we're happy with everything now, the answer is always no. So you want something to change? Yes. So why does the concept freak us out? But understanding that made me much more open to change, that actually for things to get better, things have to change. It's not always a negative. And that was a really important thing I heard at the right time for me as well as I entered the workplace. So, yeah, an impact on me, that's for sure.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. I mean, let's be honest. I'm grateful for cars. I'm grateful for planes. I'm grateful for all of the change that has brought us to where we are in the society today. I wouldn't have survived in the caveman days. Let's just say that.
Absolutely, yeah. Me too. And the other thing, when people say, can we go, I'd love to go back 50 years or 100 years to those Victorian times. And you say that until you need to go and see a dentist. Right? The moment you go and see a dentist and you're like, have you got any anesthetic? And they're like, what's that? The thing that you inject in my gum to take the pain away. No, never heard of it. There's some rum and just pass me those pliers. I tell you would be praying for 2025. You'd be like, get me back there as fast as you can.
That's hysterical and so accurate. So true.
Hey up and welcome to the Strategy Sessions. My name is Andy Jarvis. I'm the host of the show and the Chief Strategy Officer at Eximo Marketing. Thank you for tuning in today. It means a lot to me and the team behind the Strategy Sessions. Before we go on with the guest, can I ask you to do two things for me? One, please interact with this episode. If you like it, if you hate it, I'd love you to leave a review and just let me know a few things about it. If you want to send it to me directly, my email address is in the show notes, so please do just fire me a message. Love to hear what you think. But interacting with the episode does help more people find it, so it really does help. So thank you for that. The second thing I'd like to say is send it to a friend. Is there someone you drop a WhatsApp to or an iMessage to and be like, yeah, I've heard this episode, do you want to have a listen to this person? It's great. Honestly, it's a great way to help people discover things. So please do interact with the episode or share it with a friend if you've enjoyed it. And that's about it, really. Let's get on with the show and get back to the guest interview. Cynthia Harris, thank you for joining me on the Strategy Sessions. You are the founder of 828 Insights. Have I said that right?
You did. It's perfect.
Excellent. Which has what could well be thought of as a strange line on the website. It says, 828 Insights is a human-centered marketing strategy and consumer insights agency. Now, everyone in marketing and insights should be human-centered, shouldn't they? But they're not. So
it's very true. Yeah. It is. It's wild, but it also, for me, is the inspiration to keep doing this work. We're in a world where, as you know, data is so ubiquitous at this point. We can get data points at a click of a fingertip, right? Data is out there and prevalent. And what I've seen happen in the marketing space is we've become so performance oriented, and performance matters. We need to have performance marketing. I'm a big fan of performance marketing as well. But the truth is, even for performance marketing to be effective, it has to be generated from an insight that is generated from a human experience. And so, I really believe wholeheartedly that focusing on human centricity is incredibly important in any marketing decision, any marketing campaign, because without people, without humans, you have nothing. It's something that I'm very passionate about personally. And fortunately, we have a lot of brands and clients that believe that humans should be at the center of their decision making. So yeah, it's interesting that we've come to this place that we have to remind people of that.
Well, look, if you go to the Eximo marketing website, you see a big header that says customer-inspired marketing strategy. It's a kind of similar world, slightly different phrasing, but similar world. And I think that's one of the reasons why when we met, I was just like, we're kindred spirits. We get along because maybe we view the marketing world the same way, and maybe the rest of the world, who knows? But actually, let's tell the story just because it's a great one. Big flex. Where did we meet?
Oh, that's so funny. It perhaps is a big flex. We met on a yacht in the south of France at Cannes Lions Festival, which, it sounds a little flexy, but it is true.
Listen, that's just how we roll, Cynthia. That's. I was on a budget airline flight and out to Cannes, but let's forget about that. But we were sat on a yacht on the Mediterranean, interviewing, listening to, and to you and some of those kind of biggest brains in the marketing industry before taking a little cruise around the Med. So it's life's tough sometimes, isn't it?
I was on a budget airline on the way there too, so no shame. I'm very content on either side of the spectrum.
Absolutely. So we met and we were talking about insights at this event. And often like the role of AI, and that's kind of coming hard into the insights world, which I think we'll come back to shortly. But I want to find out a little bit more about this human-centered marketing strategy and insights, and find out how you work as an organization when you're working with a client. So you work with some pretty big names. Probably can't say what those names are, but you work with some pretty big companies as well. Do you start with a brief? Do you get a brief from a client and do you look at it and you're like, this is the worst brief I've ever seen? Or do you look at it and go, these briefs are great? Where do you stand on the brief spectrum? Are they any good?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say 90% of the time we do work from a brief. Sometimes that brief is verbal. So sometimes a client will say, hey, let's hop on the phone. Let's share with you what our business problem is. And we help them think about what needs to go into the brief, so that we avoid that kind of misconstrued word on a page, right? So that we're super clear up front with what the objective is that they're actually trying to learn. And for us, we want our clients to learn something in the engagement, but we also want them to feel something. And so we spend a lot of time in the upfront thinking about how we're going to bring them into the research. And then also how we're going to deliver the research in a way that will last far beyond the engagement. So 90% of the time, again, it does start with a brief. There are some times that we are looking at our client's business and saying, hey, we see this is happening out there. We see that, on socials, people are talking about these things. Might you want to learn a little bit more about this particular topic? So one of those topics, if you are in the United States, you know that there's been some denim wars of sorts. Denim has been a very hot topic in the zeitgeist. And that's one of those things that we kind of shook the trees a little bit and said to a few clients, hey, do you want to know more about how this audience is responding to these quote unquote denim wars? So again, that happens to a lesser extent, but more often than not, we do start with a brief. Briefs are incredibly important, not just to kind of hone in on the problem that needs to be solved through the research, but it also for us provides a bit of a blueprint for what we need to deliver, so that the company can learn what they need to learn to make the right decision. So it definitely most often starts with a brief.
I think you're right. Getting that alignment and understanding, because words mean different things in our industry, don't they? Someone talks about strategy. There is no clear definition of what that means. Generally, people say it's about setting direction, but what is in a strategy and what is out of a strategy could mean different things. And demographic terms mean slightly different things to different people or in different countries. And if you talked about a small business in the US, it means a very different thing to a small business in the UK. So getting that alignment up front and really making sure that those foundations are dug properly before you start building is really, really important, isn't it, with clients?
It is for sure. I think the brief, especially when you're on a client side of this brief, it's really important to make sure that you're delivering it against a KPI that somebody on your team has probably set out for the organization. I think as an agency owner and as an agency member of the equation, it's important for us to think beyond the brief. I feel like a part of the reason I even started 828 was to have permission to think outside of the box. So while we do seek to deliver in the box of the objective that a company might reach out to us for, we are always thinking tangentially about how else can we add value beyond what they've actually asked, because that's where the real magic typically happens. And as an outside party who cares about the health of the brand, we do want to bring some value that perhaps they hadn't even thought of yet. I feel like that is our responsibility as suppliers to these brands. We are trusted partners. And again, they're on the inside, oftentimes, trying to deliver to things that they've been given from an upper management perspective. But I think it's our job to expand their thinking and to think beyond the brief alone.
This episode is part of the Black History Month mini-series. Every October, Black History Month comes to the UK, and every October I release a series of episodes featuring amazing marketers who just happen to be Black. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you can share this with a friend. It's interesting because a lot of agencies get fired or maybe go through a repitch process sometimes, and they can sit there when they get that communication from the client and go, well, what did we do wrong? They asked for ABC, and we did ABC. And then they asked for ABC and we did ABC. And they go through this process of delivering exactly what the client asks for. And then being told 3 years later that we're kind of looking for some new thinking. And it can be quite hard to get your head around that sometimes when the client's asking for ABC, you've got to give them D&E as well. And that's not about, sometimes it's about additional value, but sometimes it's about coming at the problem from a different angle so that you can go back to them with something different. And that's what keeps them fresh and keeps them coming back for it. But it can be really tricky when you first move into agency world, can't it? When you're like, I did everything you asked from me in the time you gave me, on the budget you gave me, and now you're telling me that wasn't enough. I'm like, what is it that you want? It's a weird world, isn't it?
It is weird. And I do think it's unique, Andy. I started my career 20 years ago, which is hard to believe it's been that long. But, I think now to my earlier point, we have such a proliferation of information and data. Anytime you're delivering a piece of work, you should expect that piece of work will be outdated in 9 months, because the world and culture and society is moving at such a rapid pace that it is imperative that we think about things beyond our initial objective. Because again, nothing is static in this world. I think there are some reverberating truths that can be uncovered with research, but even the way in which those truths are brought to life for organizations needs to evolve on a constant basis so that you're not stale. So it's just a very different world. And I think it is incumbent on us to think beyond exactly what we're asked, because that again is where the magic is. That's where the incrementality is. That's where the innovation is. It's really outside of the sandbox for sure.
So you used the word magic a couple of times in the last few minutes. And I had a guy on the show last year called James Hayhurst, who runs the Magic Source program, which is about getting agencies and clients to work better together, finding that magic source. What do you think is the magic source for agency-client relationships? Because you've been both sides, right? So what would you say are the factors that make those great things happen?
Yeah, when I think about the magic in some of the relationships that we have, I think it starts with trust, quite frankly. I think when I think about kind of the magical moments, it's because we have established a relationship that allows us both to push to uncomfortable spaces. And again, that's where the magic comes from, in my opinion. Growth, again, it comes from being uncomfortable. So I do think that trust is a big part of that equation. I think it's also something that results from just believing that something can be bigger than what you can even imagine. Just having a core belief that bigger is possible is actually not a commodity in today's society. You know, we have been conditioned to believe what we see. And I think just imaginations are under attack, quite frankly. So perhaps the fact that I even use the word magic so often is a result of how I like to navigate the world. And that is to believe that bigger is possible. And, you know, I just living in a world and a society where we think we can prove everything, in some regards is a good thing, right? It's great that we have science. I'm a big believer in science. I'm also a huge believer that, you know, you have to believe that bigger is possible. And that's where the magic actually happens. So, you know, I think about a client that we worked with last year on a particular rebrand. And this is a long heritage brand. They are known for a thing in the United States. It's actually a French-owned company, but they are highly penetrated here in the United States. And for so long, their executive team had held to, this is what we think the brand is. But we took them into homes and they discovered how people actually think about their brand. And what that unlocked was new ways and new occasions in which they could show up in the lives of these people. And that's where the magic came in. But I give them so much credit for being willing to go into these homes and to be uncomfortable with the disconnect between how they thought they were presenting the brand and how people were actually consuming the brand. So yeah, I think trust is important. I think leaving room for new thinking, leaving room for more creative thinking is really important. And then again, just willingly being uncomfortable, I think is a big part of how magic is created.
And to go back to right where we started, all these things are quite difficult for people to do, aren't they? Because we don't like change. And, you know, you don't really get any thanks in business if you go in and start talking about magic when someone's talking about numbers and talking about P&L and talking about profit. And you're going, we're here to make magic. And you're like, yeah, right, okay, whatever. So, but these are concepts that actually are really, really important. And imagination, you mentioned earlier as well. The thing I think that's going to set apart agencies over the next 5 years is those that can harness imagination and that magic. Because anyone can use AI. The barrier to being able to do a lot of this stuff yourself has now dropped. So what can't you do? You can't, if you can harness that magic, you take it to a different place and people will be beating a path to your door. I believe that to be true. I just haven't quite worked out how to harness it yet. So if I can, if you any advice on kind of capturing lightning, let me know, and then we'll take it from there.
That's hysterical. I wish I could. When I come up with that formula, I'll let you know. But yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. I think that, again, believing magic is possible, but then creating that as a part of your engagement is really important. We did something recently with a client where we kicked off the engagement by taking this client to a show. The show had nothing to do with what we were studying, but we wanted them to feel a certain emotion behind the work that we were doing. And so, you know, I do think it's important to think creatively about how you can get your client to feel something. You know, for us, we say it all the time that our work doesn't matter if you don't feel something as a result of our engagement. And so from the very beginning, we try to think about ways in which we can help clients feel, because I think feeling is such an underrated way to do work these days. We're just going at 100 miles a minute, 100 kilometers, I should say, a minute. And the truth is, if you don't feel something, you can't do anything differently. You're just on autopilot and you'll miss the forest for the trees. So
one of the great advertising stories over here in the UK is around I can't remember which agency it was, but they were going for British Rail. So this is 30 years ago, maybe 40 years ago. They were pitching for British Rail, the state rail company, which had a reputation for being late and awful service, shitty trains. It wasn't great. And they turned up, the British Rail turned up to the agency's office for the pitch, and they showed them into what was effectively a broom cupboard. Really bad chairs, really tatty. They asked them if they wanted a drink, and they brought them like a really bad cup of tea in a polystyrene cup and kind of just shut them in and left them. And the appointment was 3:00, and they left it to 3:05, 3:10, 3:15, 3:20. And when they walked in, the guys from British Rail were red-faced, apoplectic, ready to leave. And they opened the door and they were like, "This is the experience most of your customers tell us that they have. We just wanted you to feel a little bit of that before we go and show you what we're going to project, because we can tell anyone anything, but if this is what they get, and they won the pitch. Now, it's high risk, but it was an agency that didn't expect to win it, so they took the high risk and won. And it's such a great example of making the client feel something, even if it was a slightly negative emotion initially, that won them. And I love that story. Absolutely love it.
It's amazing. And it is what it is, Andy. As you know, a marketing principle and just a principle in life is we're more motivated when we feel fear, when we feel discomfort. It's no surprise, perhaps, that if you look at just the news on a global level, it tends to lead with fear. They're not dumb people. They're thinking about how they can capture attention and motivate people to do things differently. And that doesn't tend to always happen with pictures of babies and rose petals. It a lot of times does start with an emotion that isn't so positive, right? It's our goal as marketers and as brand builders to turn negative into positive. That's where that magic comes in. But, it's amazing how fear is such a great motivator, and discomfort can be such a motivator to beautiful work.
Going back to your process with clients, then when we met, I was wearing a T-shirt that said "Talk to your customers." I know this because I wear it all the time at certain events, and this comes from some research I did that found that less than 5% of e-commerce marketers have spoken to a customer in the last 6 months, which is terrifying, but also not surprising. So once you've got the brief and you've worked out where you're going to add the magic to it, what sort of process do you got? How do you shape the research that you're going to do? Because there's so many different ways you can approach a research project. Do you have sort of an internal team who gets on that? How do you sort of go through those next steps?
What we do is we take the brief and then we go to what we call our sandbox. And our sandbox really is a bunch of different approaches that we use. And, we are known to do anything from throw a pizza party at a fraternal house to, talking to moms during nap time to understand the emotion that she feels during nap time. So, we don't ever take just the same approach to anything. We do have some approaches that are pretty turnkey. If a client needs something quickly, if they need a deliverable, that's really succinct and fast, we might deliver a newsletter versus a full deck of experiences. But we do go to the sandbox first. And I have a very small internal team where we say, hey, how can we deliver on this in a way that, again, is going to make the client feel something, it's going to deliver on the objectives, and it's going to allow us to leave something behind that will inspire them. I think one unique thing about us at A28 is we also have a collective that we work with. So we work with a lot of creatives who are not researchers per se, but have a skill that can help bring a research assignment to life. So for example, we have Grammy Award winning artists in our collective where we might hop on the phone and say, hey, how would you think about delivering this specific thing? We have multimedia artists that we've worked with to deliver things like, visual art that can kind of stick out in the minds of clients. So we might pull them in at that process. We might just assume that they might want to help us out and plug them in. And then we deliver the thought to the client. And so the way in which we deliver proposals, we more often than not are telling a story at the proposal phase because we want the client to see how we would think about solving it. And we want them to feel like they're on the journey from the very beginning. And so, after we've kind of built our sandcastle, we'll present it to a client, get feedback from them. They know their organization and their culture better than we do in many cases. And so they're able to say, yep, I think this is going to land with this executive team, or no, this should probably be a podcast and not a deck because this person's on the road a lot and that's who we need to influence. So we do ask questions around, who needs to be influenced, what decisions are going to be made. And that also guides how we think about the deliverables that we'll give to a client. And then hopefully if we're lucky and if we're fortunate, the client signs off and says, let's go. And so we, really just kind of buckle up and get off to the races. We align resources, we align timing. We're quite agile. I think a part of the reason why I keep the team small is so that we can be agile, so that we can roll up our sleeves and get things done with the lack of bureaucracy. I actually think being small is a superpower. And so we're able to kind of get off to the races quite quickly. And then hopefully we have a great engagement and clients are pleased. And fortunately, hopefully we can do it again.
And what's your view on timelines as well? You mentioned, if some clients need something in a hurry. My experience this side of the water is that what previously might have needed 12 weeks, people are now asking for in 6 or 4 or even 2. And you're just like, okay, I mean, are you getting that same time pressure? Everything's needed yesterday?
For sure. I think that's prevalent across the globe, Andy, for sure. And I think there are some things that we can responsibly go quicker on, right? And we obviously want to buckle up and do what we need to do to deliver against a client's request. There are some things that do take longer and should take longer, right? So if we're doing something that requires studying a group of people over the course of time, we will say, hey, we can go quicker, but here are the implications of going quicker so that they understand that it's a trade-off, and, speed, I think, is a beautiful thing. We are quicker now than we've ever been, thanks to a lot of technological advancements, thanks to oiling the grease of our wheels, that type of thing. But the truth is, it is a sacrifice in some regards. You do sacrifice depth at some times when you go quicker. But I think it all goes back to, what are you trying to influence? We just delivered something this week, as a matter of fact. And in this particular case, what is it? The end of September now. This particular client needs to go into some quantitative testing to inform a product development decision. And so their resource went from huge budget to a very slim budget. That's happening a lot these days too. And their timeline went from, we have 6 months to we have 6 weeks. And, I feel quite proud that client emailed me just last night and said, we are blown away by what you guys were able to do with less resource on a, tighter timeline. So I think faster is definitely possible. We spent more time with them verbally than what we ordinarily would have, because again, we want things to stick for the client. So I think when we're going faster, we just have to be choiceful about what the engagement looks like, so that you're not sacrificing efficacy in engagement, but that you're able to still kind of deliver the objective, the feeling, et cetera. So yeah, that's definitely happening here. Unfortunately, I have not figured out how to create time for for ourselves and for clients, but faster can be good.
So there is one guy on TikTok who lives genuinely rent-free in my head. He's some sort of tech bro. If you haven't seen him, I'm going to send you a link afterwards. And he talks about, I have inverted time to create myself more days than you get in life. He said, why do we treat time like a guy in a cave did 300 years ago? And I'm like, people didn't live in caves 300 years ago. And he says, so I get up at 6 till 12, bang, that's day 1. 12 till 6, bang, that's day 2. 6 till 12, bang, day 3. I'm doing 3 days. So over a week, I'm doing 21 days. I'm kicking your ass. Over a year, I'm unstoppable. Yeah. And you're just like, we need a petition to make podcast equipment more expensive, right? We need to stop people like that being able to access the means to reach other people. But it's amazing. I'm going to send it, because if he can do it, if he can invert time to give himself 3 times as many days in the week, you can too.
Mm-hmm. That's hysterical. Please send it to me. I would love to see that. That's hysterical. I mean, here's the thing, Andy. I don't know if you agree, but I think when we have constrained resources, whether it's time, money, et cetera, I actually think creativity flows out of that kind of a situation. So while I would love to be able to print time for many reasons, including my mom's aging, so I'd love to be able to print time and have more time with her, for example. The truth is, when we have constraint, we have creativity, and it's a motivator, to use my mom as a very personal example, she is older than she's ever been, obviously, and she's going through some changes physically, and that's forcing me to go home more often, right? So there's some beauty that comes in constraint that I think we can definitely choose to fix our eyes on as well. So,
yeah. So 12 years ago, before I even started a marketing podcast, I used to write for Irish Tech News. I used to do write for them. They would publish things I write. And they sent me to interview a biologist, really famous British biologist called Professor Robert Winston. And I asked him, I said, what would you do if you had unlimited budget? And he was like, we'd be all worse at what we're trying to do. He's like, the fact that we have time and budget constraints makes us better scientists and gets us to things quicker. He said it's just undoubtedly one of those things, one of those paradoxes that, yes, you need enough money to make certain things happen, but, the Chinese launched that huge AI, I forget the name of it now, which was equivalent to some of the stuff coming out of the US because they didn't have access to some of the best stuff. So sometimes it forces you into thinking differently, which can only be a good thing.
I agree. I worked in a category once that I worked in hair care. I'll just tell you what the category was. And, hair care at that time was very developed by a few big players, right? So you had your Pantenes, your L'Oreals, your et cetera. But what we found was that a lot of the fighter brands, the smaller, scrappy brands, if you looked at them in aggregate, they actually were bigger than some of the biggest brands out there. And the innovation was actually coming from the smaller guys and gals, right? And I think the same is true in so many categories and so many spaces where true innovation actually is coming from those that are resource constrained, and there's many reasons for that, right? There's, bureaucracy, there's a whole lot of reasons for that. But, if you're a small guy or gal out there, definitely consider it your advantage in some respects because you have permission to innovate and to think very differently than what you might if you're managing a $1 billion budget.
While you're talking about earlier days in your career, I do want to pick up on something because I love when I see two letters on people's resume. When I see P and G on there, I absolutely love it. I've had probably half a dozen former P&G staff on the pod at some points. Never had a current P&G member of staff on. That's worth saying. And it's always fascinating the way they talk about the lessons they learned while working there. So what were kind of maybe 2 or 3 things that shaped your career when you worked at P&G?
Yeah, P&G, I say this all the time, but it is truly one of the gifts in my life that keeps giving. It was one of the most incredible periods of my life. Not only did I make really good friends there that are still my friends today, but it felt like a second MBA. People say that all the time, but it did feel like a second business degree because the fundamentals are just sound within that organization. And they definitely take a long-term view on brand building. So I am incredibly grateful for my time there. In terms of 2 or 3 lessons, I think, the few that come to mind is having a similar language with the people that you're working with is incredibly important for decision-making. There is a language when you work at P&G that you just kind of know what somebody means by the words that they're using, the tone that they're using. And, I think that's incredibly important to be able to speak in a way that everybody understands. So if I say to somebody like, for example, this was on my WNDP, which now is outdated, but at that time it had a meaning, right? People know what that means. Or if I said, hey, my 5 rocks were around these things, they know exactly what I mean by that. I think about DPSM all of the time, which all of these things are things that are ingrained with how the business is run. So I think a common language is incredibly important. P&G is also a place that really values people, in my opinion. I'm so fortunate to have worked for other esteemed organizations, but I had never seen a place that really valued the people in the way that P&G did. And so what I saw was that people felt some psychological safety at the time that I was there. So, certainly it was a performance organization. So you needed to perform and you needed to, again, hit your objectives, make sure that you're delivering what the business asked of you. But it was done in a way that felt safe and it gave you permission to kind of perform from a place of a positive feeling, in my opinion. So I really appreciated that. And the other thing that I'll say is that it is a culture of sharing and reapplying. So, it's very rare to go to the drawing board in a blank space at P&G. There's always somebody across the company who has done what you are trying to do or who has at least thought about doing what you're trying to do. So it was truly as easy as picking up the phone and calling somebody, even if they were in a different market, to say, hey, I'm dealing with this problem. How did you guys deal with it in Europe? Or how did you deal with it in Asia? And that could inspire how we thought about it here in the United States. So I really appreciated that as well. And I have to say that's one of the things that I took with me from P&G. And that is, don't be afraid to pick up the phone and call and ask. The beautiful thing about P&G is so often people leave the company and go do even greater things. And to this day, I still pick up the phone and call P&Gers when I'm facing a problem or a challenge, or if I need to think differently about a thing. My first call is typically to a P&G alum, and sometimes to my old bosses at P&G that are still there. I'm still good friends with them, and I call them often.
I love that bit about sharing ideas. Like, as a consultant, sometimes that's one of the things you're brought in to do, right? People are looking for someone who's done that thing before, or can you bring in a shortcut? But that's a kind of it's a paid for relationship, right? But that across the organization, and I know it's global, I know it's huge, I know it works in billions of dollars rather than any other size, but being able to tap into that to just get a head start on anything you're doing, it just feels like the most amazing place to work. I'm sure it has its challenges. I'm sure it has its dickheads working there as well. That's a very British way of phrasing it, but every place does, right? But it seems like such a great place to work, or at least to start your career.
I certainly felt that way for sure, Andy. And no place is perfect. I want to be clear. No place is perfect. I don't want to paint a rose-colored, lens on everything. There are certainly opportunities within the organization. But the one thing I can say is I do think they want to get things right. I always felt that way personally. Even as an alum of the organization, it's akin to my alumni status of the greatest university in America, the Ohio State University. I went to Ohio State, which is, in my opinion, also a predominant institution. But we really care about one another. I know that I can pick up the phone and call a Buckeye similarly. And Buckeyes go off and do things around the world, right? P&G is the same way. In fact, just yesterday, I was on a P&G alumni call, and it was all about AI. And, not just how to use AI, but, how do you ethically use it? How do you integrate it into your organization? What are the positives and potential pitfalls? So it's an organization that, in my opinion, keeps giving even beyond your time there at P&G. And that's very unique and special.
When you hear people talking about P&G, the way they describe it sounds like they're talking about a small family firm that's kind of 15 people at the end of the block. And, every P&G you talk to weirdly describes almost identically the same organization, but makes it sound like it was just 10 or 15 people working on a thing and solving a problem. Yeah, that can't be, but it feels like a really small family, but with tens of hundreds of thousands of people worldwide. I don't know how they do that. Maybe they've bottled lightning. That's maybe how they've managed it.
Well, it's true. And I will say, I don't know who said this, but somebody said once, your brand is not what you say your brand is. Your brand is what people say your brand is. And, quite honestly, I'm sure that they also think about that, right? They care that people leave the organization and speak fondly of the organization. So, I'm sure people leave disgruntled too. I've seen people leave disgruntled, right? So not everybody has the same experience, but I do think that so many of us have the same respect and reverence. A part of it too, Andy, is, and I actually have never thought about it in this deep of a manner, so thanks for the reflection time, but it's one of those organizations that's hard to get into. At the time that I worked at P&G, they accepted less than 1% of applicants. So it is a very challenging organization to get into. You take a series of tests, cognitive tests, to ensure that you can think similar to your peers. And so what that creates is this very kind of unspoken respect for everybody in the room. And I do think that's also very special because, if you're in that room, that person has a certain level of ability to contribute, right? There's just an inherent respect that comes with that. And so I think it's special. It's really a special place, not perfect, but a place that I'm certainly grateful I spent some time at for sure.
Well, look, we bounced around across your career. I want to come back to just maybe the end of the process at 828 Insights, where, you've talked about you've delivered the work to the client. They've got it. They've probably asked you for 12 weeks worth of work in 6, so you've rushed really fast. You've given them it, and then they've done nothing with it for 6 months. But we'll skip that part because we know that happens, right? But is it the greatest part of what you do when you've worked on a project, the research has gone back, they've made some changes, or they've launched a new thing, and that thing hits the shelves or becomes public and then goes and the sales fly? Is that the best part of the job when when the call comes in and going, you'll never guess what's happened with this? It's great. Is that great? Is that the best thing that happens?
That's a great question. Certainly that's a big contributing factor to why I keep signing up to do this kind of work, But if I'm being honest, Andy, clients don't always call and tell you what happens next, right? Sometimes it's on us to say, hey, what happened with that work or what decision was made. So I think we're getting better about saying up front, like, and we want to know what you're going to do with this work. I just said that yesterday to a client, like, tell us what happens next, but yeah, for sure. There is a particular client. We work with a beverage client here in the United States that just launched a beautiful new campaign. And I'm looking at the deck that we delivered to them. I sometimes will dust off and say, like, what did we deliver to them? And what parts of that did they integrate into how they actually went to market? And that is really fulfilling, right? We almost feel like the Wizard of Oz in some respect, because people don't know all the time that we're working behind the scenes to help them influence their management. And, I think one day, I don't know how, when, or where, but maybe Oz will come out of the back of the tent, and one day we'll be able to talk a little bit more publicly about what we've influenced. But it is really rewarding to see when clients have actually integrated recommendations. And there was a client recently who sent me a note. They work with a celebrity who is a very well-known celebrity who's very interconnected with this brand. And in a very personal way, but we made some pretty challenging recommendations on, if you want to grow new audiences, you should consider different things about this celebrity. And they called and said, hey, Cynthia, we need some confidence before we go talk to said celebrity. Can you help us with what people said to give us the confidence to say, what we need to say? That for me is really rewarding too, where, people are looking for a bit more assurance from the work to help them have those hard conversations. But for sure, when you see a product on the shelf, or when you see, for us, a lot of times it's a commercial that airs, or, when you see a campaign really kind of go there, the agency took permission to really do something provocative. It makes me feel so prideful. It really does.
I talk about the little dance that I do when I see things like that. There's a little, I'm not going to do it on camera. There's a little boogie that goes in the office. I'm like, oh, yeah. Love it. I love it. Sorry, I said I wouldn't dance and I did. Right, quick, move on.
You can do the dance.
So listen,
no judgment.
No,
you can do the dance.
No. It's a private dance. It sounds like a Tina Turner song. Right. So before we run out of time, can you tell us about a book or a podcast or a resource that you think other people should read that might just help make them think differently or be better at their jobs?
Yeah, there's so many. I listen to tons of podcasts. I'm definitely a consumer of knowledge. I think the more knowledge we can consume, the better we can do our jobs. But one thing that I'm reading right now, it's a book that came out a while ago, but it's called For the Culture. It's by Dr. Marcus Collins, who is a professor at the University of Michigan, but also just a great brand mind. He's a marketer, a very accomplished marketer. And because I knew you might ask me this question, marked a part of what I'm reading, and I'll share it with you all. He quoted another author whose name was Amis Nin. And he says in the book that we don't see things as they are. We see them as we are. That is, truth is not objective, as we would like to believe. The truth is culturally mediated and socially negotiated and constructed based on our communal view of reality. It's based on our beliefs. And I just think that's really profound. In the book, he talks a lot about culture and how, culture really influences how we see the world. And because culture is so influential in how we see the world, brands have to understand culture to be able to insert themselves authentically in the world of people around. So this is a book I would highly recommend. I just started it, but it's one that I'm having a hard time putting down. I'm like, do I have to work or can I read? So yeah, I would highly recommend it.
And listen, the reading's part of work, definitely part of work. Yeah. Really interesting, the quote that you read out there, and I'm sure it's written by a marketer or a doctor, obviously, but it's not just relevant for marketing, is it? You'd only have to look at what's happening, not just in the US, but around the world at the minute, to realize that we can't keep looking at people at the other side of the political divide or social divide and shouting at them and telling them they're wrong, because they're doing the same thing to us and going, no, you're wrong. And actually, it's because the truth is being looked at through their eyes, and they are interpreting it in a different way. And that's why everyone stood shouting at each other. Can't quite work out why everyone's on the other side of the divide. And it's like, it's because we're kind of interpreting it culturally the way we want to do. So yeah, it's quite profound for the end of the pod. Thank you.
Of course. And I do think as brand builders, we have one of the very few jobs in the world that can actually unite people around a thing that, both sides of any divide can agree on. People generally want their kids to be healthy, right? Marketers can give that message. People generally want to feel good at the end of the day. Marketers can wear in that message. I just think we sit in a very unique space in the world where we can shape people's view of what truth is and help them realize that, hey, your truth is not an objective truth. It's your truth, but there's another truth that's much bigger that we can all agree on. So yeah, I totally agree with you, Andy.
I love that. I love that. And what a place to finish. Cynthia Harris, thank you very much. If you want to connect with Cynthia, her details, her LinkedIn is in the show notes. But until then, Cynthia, thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invite, Andy.